Hello, my name is Milana Kuzmanovic. Once again, I'm here with Evan Tanner, and we're doing this final conversation video to close out the course by discussing some of the risks and vulnerabilities that Diagnostica faces.
Hi again, everybody.
So overall, I got the sense that you did not perceive Diagnostica's current situation as one of grave and immediate risks. You do not seem to be worried about severe crisis occurring anytime soon.
No, I think that's a fair way to put it, Milana. I mean, you know, I didn't give any of the four areas a high rating. I gave the fiscal and the external a moderate rating, and then inflation and financial sector a low rating.
Yes, and I agree that we shouldn't be announcing that there are grave dangers when in fact there are none, especially because we risk our credibility and our reputation if we sound too many false alarms. However, I was influenced by your colleague who did suggest to us that sometimes it is our job to be pessimistic.
Yeah, sometimes, but not all the time, because you have to remember. I mean, think of somebody who's sounding a fire alarm, even if there's no fire, and he does it multiple times. At some point, people will just stop paying any attention to that fire alarm, and that could be a really dangerous situation, especially if there really is a fire finally.
You certainly have a point, but let's discuss some of your assessments now. Let's start by thinking about fiscal.
Yeah, I think a fiscal's a good place to start, and that's if there are any of the risks that I would have ranked the most critical, it would be that one.
Why?
Well, I mean, we've already seen the debt ratio rise, and you know, ultimately it will stabilize, but it has been rising in the past.
Well, the primary reason why we expect it to stabilize is due to the increase in primary balance that is programmed into the later years. However, I do think there should be a question whether that is actually going to happen. I believe that's something we refer to as the implementation risk. Am I using the term correctly?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a kind of a risk that actually we didn't highlight so much in the previous videos. But yes, there's always a risk that, okay, you put in an adjustment program, you plan on it, but then ultimately it doesn't happen. That's what we call implementation risk. But you know, Milana, you know, I really don't see that risk too much. I mean, what have we seen in recent years? We've actually seen the government respond. We've seen this adjustment as reflected in the fiscal impulse. And what that tells me, in fact, is that the government is actually serious about maintaining or restraining its debt growth.
Yes, but by then the authorities may be facing resistance from the public from implementing even more austere measures, something we call the adjustment fatigue. But let's move on to the external sector. I have to say I was surprised, particularly by the baseline scenario for the external debt sustainability.
We had a variety of assessments on the external sector, and you know that, for example, the external balance assessment didn't actually look all that bad. In fact, there was room for the current account deficit to grow and for the room for the real exchange rate to appreciate. So, I mean, that's a factor.
However, those were backward-looking assessments. According to our external sector experts, there will be substantial challenges in the external environment in the coming years. That might call for need in substantial adjustments in the net exports. Don't you think that is something that calls for more than just a moderate rating?
Well, okay, yes, we have experts, but nobody has a crystal ball, not even our experts. And besides, we have to think about that fiscal adjustment, because the fiscal adjustment is going to help rein in those net exports. You remember that channel of transmission. So, I mean, in that sense, I think we want to give it a moderate risk, but, you know, I don't want to sound the alarm bell once again.
Yes, but like I mentioned before, that's if that adjustment occurs. It seems we just came back to the same issue I mentioned a few minutes ago, the issue of the implementation risk. That being said, it could also be that the adjustment could come about through the depreciation of the real exchange rate. Isn't that true?
You know, you're exactly right, Milana.
In that case, that leads me to my next question about inflation. If everything we've been saying is true, shouldn't we be more concerned about this inflation risk, especially those that would come about as it passes through the depreciation of the exchange rate? If everything we've been saying is true, shouldn't we have a higher rating than just low?
Well, okay, but think about it this way. Okay, suppose that, I mean, you are sort of painting a little bit darker picture, and suppose that this comes to pass, because suppose that financial markets tighten up even further, and yeah, you'll have pressures on the exchange rate to depreciate, but also that's going to squeeze out domestic demand, and that's going to place some downward pressures on the inflation rate. So there are risks in both directions.
So if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, you are seeing some risk to the inflation, lower output gap, lower inflation. Am I interpreting this correctly?
I think you want to look on both sides of the coin here, as it were. I think that's what you need to do.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, let's move on to the financial sector. You also rated this as a low risk. However, if the growth is falling, don't you think that that might be putting pressure on financial system even more?
Well, sure, but low risk does not mean no risk.
Thank you, Evan, so much for taking the time to clarify some of the questions I have, and now I have a better understanding of where your views are coming from.
Well, Milana, it was like a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure.
We hope that this video has conveyed a sense that there are alternative views on risks and vulnerabilities, and there is no one right answer.